Here's everything you need to know in terms of Mr.
Jury
Bill
selection
Cosby.
starts today ahead of a new trial for Bill Cosby. The comedian will again be facing sexual assault charges arising from a 2004 encounter in his suburban Philadelphia home. Last year, a jury couldn't decide whether to convict or acquit the 80-year-old on these same allegations, and that resulted in a mistrial. From member station WHYY, Laura Benshoff reports that with a new jury, new defense attorneys, and a new era of accountability for sexual assault, this trial will not just be a rerun of the first.
Cosby faces 3 counts of aggravated indecent assault for allegedly drugging and molesting Andrea Constand more than a decade ago. Constand, a former basketball player with a skyscraping curly hairdo, testified that Cosby gave her 3 pills that he indicated were herbal, but were something else. She says that something else made her feel frozen and pass out during his advances. Bobby Dugan was a juror during the first trial. He says the lack of explicit consent during the encounter convinced him Cosby was guilty.
In my opinion, consent is a verbal agreement. If there is no verbal agreement, then there is no consent.
Defense attorneys argued Cosby and Constand had a romantic relationship. Dugan says he wanted to convict, but ultimately the jury couldn't reach a unanimous decision. This time, a new jury is going to hear new witnesses. A judge recently ruled to allow testimony from up to 5 women, in addition to Constand, who say Cosby also drugged and sexually assaulted them. Veteran defense attorney Thomas Bergstrom, who's not affiliated with the case, says that's a gift for the prosecution and a challenge for the defense.
I think you have to change your strategy a little bit when there's only one witness versus whether there's 5. If there's one, I think you can still argue effectively that it's consensual. But the more you get, the less consensual it is.
Cosby's not on trial for these other women's accusations, but they're allowed to testify in this case to help a jury decide whether Cosby knew what he was doing. Cosby's new lead defense attorney, Tom Mesereau, who previously defended Michael Jackson against child molestation charges, is bringing in new evidence too. In court documents, the defense has asked to call a witness they say shows Constand planned to fabricate a claim of sexual assault in order to get a big payout. Perhaps the biggest difference between the trial last June and the one next week isn't anything inside the courtroom. It's the explosion of allegations of sexual harassment and assault against high-profile men, known as the Me Too movement. Lily Bernard is an actress and artist, and one of the more than 50 women who have accused Cosby of assault.
I think that the Me Too movement is serving to educate people as to why victims remain silent for so long when they see that these big celebrities have been silent for decades.
She'll be holding silent vigils outside the courthouse every night, one of several actions planned to draw attention to survivors of sexual assault during the trial. And what about the man himself? During pretrial hearings last month, Cosby shuffled past reporters on the arm of his assistant, visibly aged since his TV days. But he still has that signature laugh.
Ready for trial, Mr. Cosby?
He seemed unfazed by the legal acrobatics taking place around him to determine whether he's a sexual predator or an old philanderer. For NPR News, I'm Laura Benshoff in Philadelphia.
Okay, Danny, let me start with you. Now, in the last 5 months or so since his mistrial there has been that active Me Too movement that they mentioned in the clip. Do you think that will be a hard jury find for Tom Mesereau and your overall take on this trial coming up?
Yeah, I think overall this is going to be a very different trial, not necessarily because of any Me Too movement, but for one very simple reason, and it's that the judge has now allowed, instead of one additional prior bad acts witness, there's going to be 5. And I think that's just nothing short of devastating. And frankly, I'm a little confused because I would think it would be the law of the case. In other words, that's an issue that was already resolved with mistrial. I don't know what facts have possibly changed between the first trial and the second trial that the judge said, well, I didn't let you have these additional witnesses to testify as to Bill Cosby's bad character before, But since the mistrial, I've changed my mind. It seems very odd to me. But for whatever reason, the judge has allowed 5 witnesses to come in and say, Bill Cosby did something substantially similar to me. And this kind of evidence, I've dealt with it. I've defended against it. It's nothing short of devastating. I guess I'm a jaded defense attorney, but to me, it sort of it defies the basic premise or the basic rule we have against character evidence. If we have this exception where you say, well, if it's similar enough, we'll let it come in, because the rule is character evidence shouldn't be admissible to show that somebody committed a crime. In other words, you can't say that someone did bad things on another occasion, and that's why they did bad things on this occasion that they're on trial for. And yet that's exactly what this evidence is. There will be 5 women who come in and say, well, he drugged me, and what's going to happen is jurors are going to start thinking, well, hey, he did it before. Sure, he did it this time. And that's why, Me Too aside, because frankly, I mean, during jury selection, they should have weeded out all the people who would not be able to be unbiased because of the Me Too movement. The Me Too movement won't be even a fraction of as significant in this case as the fact that 5 women are going to come in, point at the defendant, and say he did the same thing to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And Alex, let me go to you. There was one person who testified besides the main accuser, Andrea Constantine. Now there's an additional 4 more. But the only question is there reasonable doubt that Mr. Cosby did not do this? What's your take on the additional women coming to say, yes, he did it to me too? Is it fair or unfair for Mr. Cosby to get a fair trial?
You know, listening to the witnesses and casually, evaluating the case, I have no doubt that Cosby's guilty. That being said, I still think it's outrageous that this case is being forced to trial because of the information that we have previously discussed. Cosby made an agreement with the prosecutor, the former prosecutor. He will agree to a civil settlement, and they promised him he's not going to be prosecuted. So what on earth are we doing on trial? This is a phenomenal waste of time. If Cosby's convicted, this case has to be reversed on appeal, because you cannot make an agreement with a prosecutor who represents the state of New York, and then for the prosecutor to turn around at a later date and say, oh, no, all bets are off, we're going to convict you, even though you made statements pursuant to that agreement. That having been said, we are here. Obviously, what Danny said is absolutely right. You're going to trial on a case where there's 4 additional witnesses. That could be devastating. The defense, I would imagine, that is going to be proposed by his attorney is that these people all have big dollar signs. They're all jumping on the bandwagon because they see that if there's a conviction of Cosby, they're going to make some big bucks. And that's going to – I would not surprise me if that's going to be one of the primary defenses in this case. But there's no escaping it. Additional witnesses hurt the case of the defense and advance the case of the prosecution, and that's all there is to it.
Yeah, David, let me get your response to what Alex is saying in terms of prosecutorial misconduct in a way. These files weren't supposed to be charged from the last prosecutor. It's like a revenge thing, politics things. What's your take on that issue?
I have a lot of thoughts on that. This is actually a courthouse where I've practiced fairly often, and I've had cases. And the prosecution's position on this, well, the problem is you don't know who to believe, because the former prosecutor who was involved with this supposed deal said instead that, hey, this wasn't a deal. I didn't say that we wouldn't prosecute him if he would settle. What we were saying is we don't think we have much of a case, but you should probably settle for a dollar amount with the complainant. Now, that seems ridiculous. That's a ridiculous position to take. I mean, the bottom line is if they did have an agreement, they should honor the agreement. But the reason they prosecuted Cosby was a very political decision. I mean, it came after a snippet of a deposition transcript leak where he admitted to having used Quaaludes in the past with women, with just women in general. And based on that alone, the prosecution decided, oh, now we have a case, and it's really a strange thing, because that original snippet of the deposition was part of a motion that was filed in court that people just discovered, even though the deposition transcript itself was kept private. That snippet of the motion gave the prosecution the thread to revive this case. But if they never believed that Constan alone was enough of a complainant to bring the case, then they should still believe that. And that leads me to think, and as I've often felt, that this case may be more about politics, face saving, and bringing down a celebrity than it is about justice. Even if Bill Cosby did do what he's alleged to have done, which is obviously there are reasonable jurors who have concluded that he did. But I think
Dan,
from the beginning, this case has been very, very political.
Dan, do you happen to know the judge that ruled that Cosby can't be prosecuted despite that so-called alleged agreement with the former prosecutor?
Well,
you know him?
The judge that ruled that he couldn't be prosecuted, or
no, that he could be, that the prior so-called agreement was
right.
not valid. Do you know that judge?
It would have been O'Neill. It would have been the trial judge. Right.
Do you know him? Did you ever practice before him?
I'm sure I have. I don't remember specifically anything about him, but yeah, I mean, I know who he is, and I think I've been in his court.
Yeah, I mean, it may be a tough question. I was just wondering what your evaluation of the judge was based upon your personal knowledge. Is this guy subject to, being politically being subject to the political whims and climate that's taking place, or do you think he's just making an honest, straightforward evaluation of the case?
The part that I don't get is I would hope that he wouldn't consider something political or something like Me Too in making a decision such as allowing 5 women to testify where he previously allowed exactly 1 woman to testify. I don't know. I don't know what motivated that choice. So I don't know. I don't know much about him. From what I've seen when I've been in his courtroom, he seems fair and reasonable. But there's a lot about this case that has always concerned me, because I think it's an example of, if the prosecution wants a conviction bad enough, they can get one, whether or not they're entitled to one. And that's what makes cases like this very scary. And anytime you file a case just before the expiration of the statute of limitations, you're getting really close to some extra stale evidence. And I think that's the problem in this case. I think a couple of years ago, all these jurisdictions looked around and said, is there anywhere where we can prosecute Bill Cosby? Because in almost every other jurisdiction, the statute had run. And they found in Pennsylvania they were weeks, and I mean within weeks of the statute running, and they filed this case against him.
Yeah, but you know something, even though the prosecution may want to get a conviction here, they could not. They got help, as you indicated, from the judge, and in 2 key factors. They got help with allowing additional women to testify, and as you accurately stated, how is it the judge ruled previously that these women could not testify, and now he's ruling they could? What factors changed?
Nothing.
Was there some big major legal?
Change?
Yeah, was there some major case from the Court of Appeals of Pennsylvania that said this could be done? And why did he allow the prior agreement? Why did he declare that invalid? When you add these 2 factors together, one becomes very suspicious. Again, I think Cosby is guilty, but I'm offended by the fact that they're prosecuting him what appears to be a politically motivated case, and the judge seems in bed with the prosecutors here, and I don't like that.
Yeah, I actually agree with I agree with a lot of what you say there. That's the thing that's bothered me from the outset, is that Bill Cosby may and very well is likely guilty just based on the conduct that you read about. I mean, if I were to make a call, but there are often cases that just because it's going to sound strange to say this, that even if the defendant is guilty, the conduct of the prosecution is sometimes worse than it sometimes is just as criticizable, I guess I would say.